Line's diabetes drug Avandia released over the weekend. The government committee links Avandia to heart risks and calls for the FDA's removal of this drug from the market. Joining us right now is Jeffrey Kraws. He is senior pharmaceutical analyst at Crystal Research Associates. And Jeff, how big of a setback is this for Glaxo?
Well, Glaxo has sort of kept this information pressed down since the drug still had $1.2 billion in sales. It's a serious setback for Glaxo, especially if a deeper investigation reveals that there were any efforts that they put to cover things up. This drug had sales of $3.6 billion at its peak. It has sales of $1.2 billion now. But what's really disturbing is 66% of diabetes patients eventually die of heart disease, and this drug increases the chance of that happening by anywhere from 1/3 to 43%, according to New England Journal of Medicine studies.
We spoke earlier with Mike Huckman, our pharmaceuticals reporter, who pointed out that even some of the trial lawyers don't think that this is Merck Redux with Vioxx, that this is a situation where there was a black label that was put on. And it's been some time. Some of the cardiologists have not been prescribing Avandia, or some of the diabetes doctors have not been prescribing Avandia in the same capacity that they were before. What's your take on that?
Well, it's certainly true that the drug sales have gone down, as I mentioned, from 3.6 to 1.2 billion. But the reality is that this drug, even with a black box warning, how significantly are the doctors actually advising their patients? I mean, if you knew something had an increased chance of making you have a heart attack by 1/3 to 43%,
right,
would you actually take that product? I think it's a significant setback because in March, in the third quarter of this recent year, Avandia led the entire FDA as far as complaints with regard to fatal or damaging problems to patients of all drugs prescribed.
You think this will get pulled from the market ultimately?
I think ultimately the drug should be pulled from the market. You have a drug out there like Actos from Takeda, which has a much better side effect profile. So why would you be using something when you know that this patient group, that 66% of this patient group eventually die from heart disease? And this is a huge contributing factor from this drug, which is still out there with $1.2 billion in sales.
Larry Bossidy, how do you account for the fact that when they reviewed this once before, an independent agency voted 22-1 that this was not a drug which created heart concerns? How could they have come to that conclusion and then reverse themselves, a different body to be sure, in just 2 years?
Well, actually, that isn't what they ruled. They ruled 22-1 to keep the drug on the market. They voted 20-3 that the drug actually did increase the chance of heart attack, and that's something which is perplexing the senators as well as the public out there in general, saying, how can you say that 22-1 this drug should be kept on the market, but 20-3, oh yes, this drug does significantly increase your chance of having a heart attack?
Jeff, as an analyst, when you look at the stock and what it means for GlaxoSmithKline, what's your takeaway?
Well, my takeaway is this drug represents 1.5% of sales U.S.-wise, about 2% of total sales globally. This drug, if it gets pulled off the market, isn't going to be a significant downturn for Glaxo because it's not the $3.6 billion that it once was. It will contribute to a few cents in earnings, but I do believe you will see a significant amount of lawsuits after this because this drug, with 500 heart attacks every month and 300 heart failures every month being attributed to it, is certainly going to kill a lot more people than Redux did. And if people want to go back and get a strong litigator, if evidence does come out further supporting this, I don't think the company's going to be able to fall back on this was a black box warning label saying it could have problems.
So you'd tell investors to stay away from the stock right now?
I would tell investors until things cool down to stay away from the stock right now.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
When we return in just a little bit, Avandia, the whistleblower, Dr. Stephen Nissen of the Cleveland Clinic, will be our special guest. That's coming up at 8:30 Eastern, so stay tuned for that.